If you've been following this build, then you know that I'm going to be putting EFI on my 5.9 Magnum. Now, as you can see, I've already bought a lot of stuff for it. So that is going to be happening for sure. Which begs the question, do I regret putting the carburetor on the Magnum to begin with? And my simple answer to that is no, absolutely not. And I can explain why here. As you can see, this is a kegger that would originally come on the 5.9 Magnum if you were to get it off the truck, or well, all of them have a kegger on them. But you can see in there, this thing has super long runners, which is absolutely awesome for trucks because it allows you to tow a lot of weight without really revving the engine up, which is awesome. But that's not what I was going to be doing with my application, as many others would not be doing if they were putting it in a car or something, an old Duster or whatever. You'd probably be more aiming for the higher RPM horsepower than you would be low end torque. Now, to do that, you would have to run an intake like this. As you probably may already know, that kegger over there would not work if you try to put a carburetor on that. That would not work at all. The reason being is because the runners are so long, it would take the fuel way too long to even get to the intake side before it could even fire. And you'd probably end up with a puddle of fuel inside the plenum, which is not ideal, and it would probably cause it to starve for fuel, and then it'd be flooded all of a sudden. It just would not be a good deal at all. These intakes, of course, are designed to run the carburetor. As you can see, I got a carburetor sitting on top of it. Now that carburetor is a Holley 750 double pumper, and if you really want to know why I put a carburetor on this thing to begin with instead of using the factory EFI, aside from the intake, there's other reasons as well. Tuning was an issue. I know they do have some software for HP tuners now. At the time when I was doing this, I didn't know that, and even if I did, I probably still would have went the carburetor route. The reason being is because I would have to have an ECM to control this motor versus just turning some of these screws on the side of this carburetor here and getting my tune right. It's a lot easier. Plus, I have a 904 transmission in this truck. So if I were to try to run the factory ECM, it would have to have some way of knowing what's going on with the transmission, and this thing does not have that capability with this transmission that's in this truck. So, I mean, unless you got one out of a manual, then you might be able to do something. But even then, it's more of a hassle than it's worth whenever these Magnum engines already have a provision for a distributor to go right down in there. As you can see, that is a distributor out of a 360 LA, and they just go right on in there, and they work. But that's what I got going on with this thing. Literally, I just put that distributor in there, and at the time when I first started this, I had a cheap MSD 6AL box. It was like $125 I got from somebody, and the carburetor I bought for 150 bucks, and just needed a rebuild kit. Now the intake, that was about $400, but you can get away with a lot cheaper than that if you were to put a Chinese intake on it, or the knockoff brands. And the only difference between those, the knockoff brands, and these is I can show a picture in this video as well to kind of give you a visual representation of the difference. But as you can see on mine does have the AC compressor on it, and it's running the serpentine belt system. If you weren't running the serpentine belt system, you could get away with a Chinese one without. It'd be easier, but and you can do that with these Magnums fairly easily because the front end is basically the same as a 360 LA. They're pretty much the same, and you could definitely run the V-belt system on this. I've seen plenty of people do it. I personally didn't do it because I was going to get this intake anyway, and at the time I didn't know if I was going to run AC or not, so I went ahead and got it. But anyway, this is my setup on this truck. And like I said, whenever I first started, I had a vacuum secondary carburetor, and I also had the 6AL box. Now I've upgraded that now I got a lockout plate inside of this distributor. As you can see, there's no mechanical advance on it, or vacuum advance, I mean. See that right there, I got tape blocking it off right now. That was just a temporary thing. I was trying it out and it worked, and I just never really got around to doing anything before I decided I was going to go the EFI route, so it's really, it didn't matter at that point. But I'll show you the box that I'm running, because you have to have this box in order to do this setup the way that I'm doing it. You don't have to have this box particularly, but if you are locking it out, I would highly recommend this box, or something similar to it. This is a MSD 6AL2 programmable. Now this box, I believe, was $480. You may be able to find them a little bit cheaper now, or if you find it from somebody secondhand, it'd probably be cheaper. But I do recommend that box. It's done me great. I didn't want to mess with all the springs and the weights and everything inside of that distributor whenever there's options out there like that box, where I can just lock that thing out and go into the box itself and set my timing curves and everything. And this thing ran awesome. It does run great whenever I got that dialed in and everything. The only thing you got to do is set your total timing, and the box will take care of the rest. It'll pull the timing out. That's all the box can really do. You can just pull timing out. So whatever your maximum total timing is going to be, you can just subtract a certain number from that based on your RPM, and it can make your curve look like whatever you want it to look like. I can make a video on that at some point if y'all would like to see that, but I was just gonna throw a video out here just to show y'all how I got this one set up, kind of, and my thoughts on if I regret doing this. Now, like I said, I do believe it was absolutely worth it, and the reason I say that is because I learned a whole lot from doing this. And if you got a vehicle that you're not wanting to turbo, the only reason I'm going with EFI is because I'm going to turbo this truck. If I was not going to turbo this truck, trust me, this carburetor would stay on. And I'm trying to get into the EFI tuning world, so by putting EFI system on this, I feel like it would kind of help me advance in my learning, so that way whenever I do some other jobs, I can be more proficient at it. So a lot of things are EFI now, but that doesn't mean that yours has to be. This is my personal preference for going with EFI. I have nothing against the carburetor at all. They work great. Like I said, I have first-hand experience of how they work really, really good. And like I said about the intake thing, there's only one other option if you were to keep the EFI on your 5.9 Magnum. As far as intakes go, and that's a Hughes FI air gap. Now you might be able to get an M1 intake from Mopar, but they're super expensive because they no longer are selling them. They're discontinued. So the only thing you can really get your hands on for a decent price is a Hughes FI air gap, and that's still, you're talking $800. So not very budget friendly at all, versus throwing a carburetor on it. You could have like pretty much a whole carburetor set up for under $1,000 and you'd be just fine. Now I'm saying that by buying the cheap intake and buying a box like mine and an LA 360 distributor, and then like a $150 carburetor that you rebuild. But you could do that fairly cheap. It'd be like, I don't know, I'd say $1,200, and that's a lot better than the alternative of having to deal with all the other stuff you would have to deal with. Now I will say, if you are running this engine in a second gen truck, even a Dodge Dakota or something like that, depending on what year it is, I would not go with a carburetor. And the reason I say that is because more than likely your transmission is electronically controlled, and it has to have that input from the ECM to function properly. So if you were to try to throw a carburetor on that, it would just not be happy, because it would not have any idea of what's going on with the engine. So the transmission is not going to know when to shift, how hard to shift, etc. It would not be good. But if you do have one that's hydraulically controlled, like the 46RH, then you might be able to get away with something. But this is primarily for vehicles that are being swapped in like 70s model cars or trucks or whatever, stuff that was pre-EFI to begin with, because these Magnum motors, they'll bolt right up to any transmission. As long as it's a small block pattern, it'll bolt right up to it. 727, 904, and even 46RE, if you were to put a manual valve body in or something, you could make that work. Now that's to say, if you're going crazy with it on a Dakota RT or 2nd gen Ram, whatever, then, and you are putting a manual valve body in it, then I would say a carburetor might be an option at that point. But just I was just gonna let y'all know my thoughts on this. But like I said, the experience I've gained from messing with these carburetors and distributor, it's put me so far ahead whenever I went into the EFI tuning stuff that I already understood a lot of these concepts. EFI is just basically another way to get there. It's a different process of getting the same result. So, I mean, if you're kind of in the same boat that I was, you're kind of on a budget, but you do want to get into the EFI stuff eventually, I would say a carburetor is a good option because you can learn a lot from messing with these things and how to make an engine happy, basically. And then whenever you get into the EFI stuff, it kind of breaks down even more on, there's more to it, but it all makes sense because it's all doing the same thing. It's just doing it a different way. Also, I wanted to mention though that if you're putting one of these engines in something older, voltage regulator is going to be an issue a little bit. You just run one like they would come with stock. Like for example, mine just came out of a 75 Duster. My dad's actually, because my other one quit working. But I just took that one off my dad's car and threw it on here and hooked it up to my alternator. And you also want to keep in mind these alternators are higher output than what you would have on an older car or something. So be sure not to pump too much juice through it, you know, because these systems are only designed to handle a certain amount of amps, and that alternator is capable of pushing out more than they can handle. And I will say, make sure that voltage regulator is working, because I ran this thing for a while with like 16 volts at idle, and I didn't realize it at the time, and it fried some stuff. But just keep that in mind, that you do want to make sure that everything's happy on the electrical side of things. And originally these Magnum motors are controlled, the voltage regulators inside the ECM, so they don't have one of these on them, one of those voltage regulators on them, so keep that in mind. As far as putting one of these things in something old, I tell you what, man, this thing is so easy to go in here, because it's, like I said, the casting is basically an LA block. So as you can see, these are the factory mounts that were in this truck. This thing just bolted right up to them. Now on a 2nd gen or something, you'll have a spool mount, which is over here. The header's got blocking it, but you'll have a spool mount on there, and that's where they're mounted. But they do have the provisions, little ears sticking off to put it on the factory mounts for your vehicle. As you can see here on this side, on a D150 anyway, we did have to shim it with a bolt. I'll show you that. See that little bolt right there? Right there. We just used it as a shim basically. And this thing just fit right in there. As you can see, it looks great. Fits in there pretty good. No issues anywhere. And these Magnums, man, these heads are a lot better than the 360 LA heads are, so they run pretty good. But that's all I really got to say about it right now. If y'all have any other questions or something I missed, let me know in the comments, and I can respond there. If you want any more videos similar to this, or have any suggestions, let me know, and I'll see if I can make a video about it. But yeah, like I said, if you're doing something on a budget and you just want to make like 400 horsepower or something like that, I would definitely suggest putting a carburetor on these things. It was totally worth it for me. I do not regret that at all. That's another thing I wanted to mention. Carburetors and boost, they can work, okay? It's not like that can't happen. The only difference is with EFI, you do have more control over your fueling, so hence it makes it a little bit easier. You can, a little bit safer, I guess you could say. And I can go over that in another video if y'all are interested in that, but for now, that's all I got. Like and subscribe, and let me know what y'all thought about it.